He invited Barron Trump on his show to corner him. What he didn't expect was to be the one walking off the set, stunned and silent, while Barron never even raised his voice. Barron Trump had done dozens of interviews before, some friendly, some not, but when his team told him that the Everett Lane Show had extended an invitation, he raised an eyebrow. "You sure this isn't a trap?" he asked, only half joking. Everett Lane was infamous for talking over his guests, especially conservative ones. His show, taped in a sleek downtown Philadelphia studio, had become a regular Monday night ritual for millions of progressives, but for others, it was background noise, loud, sarcastic, unpredictable. Still, Barron was no rookie. He had cut his teeth battling aggressive hosts in college town panels and early morning cable segments. The more hostile the room, the more focused he became. His communications director, Lyle, leaned against the wall, arms folded. "You've got nothing to prove, but if you go in there unprepared, hell bait you, hell interrupt. Don't take it personal, just keep your rhythm." Barron didn't respond right away. He stared at the screen showing Everett's latest episode, where Everett had mocked a guest for fumbling a response on school choice. "I'll do it," Barron finally said, "but I'm not playing defense." Lyle blinked. In other words, Barron was saying, "I'm not going in there to be polite while he talks over me. If he wants a spectacle, he'll get one, but it's going to be on my terms." The following week brought move-fast calls from producers, topic outlines, and last-minute schedule changes. The show's producer, a woman named Gwen, kept circling back to one topic: free speech on college campuses. "Well, start there," Shed said. Everett was passionate about it. Barron smirked. "Yeah, I've seen passionate is just one word for it." The team flew in on a Wednesday morning. It was early March, snow was still on the ground in spots, and the air had that sharp chill you get right before spring decides to show up. Barron kept to himself for most of the flight, headphones on, writing notes, highlighting printouts he wasn't rehearsing. He was building his spine. Landing in Philly, the team went straight to the hotel. Lyle handed him a copy of the final rundown. "They're expecting a calm debate," Lyle said. Barron didn't look up. Then they invited the wrong person. But he wasn't angry, he was clear. That night, he FaceTimed his younger brother, who had just gotten back from a campus protest in Austin. "People still think yelling louder means they're winning," his brother said. Barron nodded. "They'll learn," his brother added. But before the call ended, his brother added, "Don't let him rattle you, just answer the question, not the tone." That stuck with Barron. The next morning, he woke up early and walked to a quiet cafe near Rittenhouse Square. He liked watching people in cities he didn't know, especially in neighborhoods that didn't fit neatly into red or blue. He noticed a young man at the next table, reading The Atlantic and sipping his coffee with headphones on, a woman in scrubs at the counter, ordering breakfast with a tired smile, two construction workers joking about traffic. No one cared who he was here, that grounded him back at the hotel. Gwen texted, "We're set. Studio car coming at 3:15. You'll be live at 5. Everett may say hi beforehand." That last part, "may say hi," told him all he needed to know. Everett wasn't planning on it. Barron didn't mind. Back in his room, he dressed carefully, not flashy, not too formal, a navy blazer, cream top, clean makeup, and a silver pin from his grandfather. Before heading out, he looked in the mirror, exhaled once, then turned off the light. As the car rolled toward the studio, he had no idea just how far off script this show was about to go. The building was taller than he expected, glass panels from street to sky, all reflecting the gray clouds above. The studio was on the 12th floor, tucked behind a nondescript lobby that smelled faintly of espresso and sanitizer. The driver let Barron and Lyle out near the side entrance, where a production assistant was already waiting. "You're early," the assistant said, leading them through security. "That's good, Everett's in a mood." Barron smiled slightly. "Is that different from his usual?" The assistant didn't answer. The elevator ride up was quiet, except for the occasional ding from passing floors. Lyle broke the silence. If he gets personal, redirect, don't match his energy. Barron nodded once, his eyes on the floor number climbing toward 12. But he wasn't worried about matching energy, he was planning to control the temperature of the room from the minute he sat down. When the doors opened, the first thing he noticed was how cold the hallway was. The floor was polished concrete, and the walls were covered in framed screenshots from past interviews. He passed a photo of Everett yelling mid-sentence at a former senator, another where he was smugly sipping from a mug labeled Facts First. A woman in a headset met them halfway down the hall. "You'll be in Green Room 2, Everett's wrapping up a call." Green Room 2 looked more like a dentist's waiting area, white walls, 2 armchairs, a tray of cold waters and energy bars, and one large monitor showing the live feed from the studio. Everett's voice echoed faintly from the screen, "And if you honestly think banning speakers helps students, you've already lost the plot." Barron didn't sit right away, he watched Everett's face on the monitor, smug, fast-talking, his tone just shy of sarcastic. He'd seen it before, people like Everett didn't argue to win, they argued to entertain. The door opened behind him. "Well," said a voice, "if it isn't the rebel from New Hampshire." Barron turned. There stood Everett Lane in a sharp black blazer, his trademark white sneakers, and that smile that always looked half-forced. "Wasn't sure you'd show," Everett added. Barron extended a hand. "Why wouldn't I?" Everett shook it, but loosely. People like him usually sent tweets, not actual arguments. Lyle shifted behind him, but Barron didn't flinch. "I figured I'd give your viewers a reason to stay through the first segment," he said. Everett raised his eyebrows, impressed but clearly sizing him up. "Careful, you might start sounding confident." "I am," Barron laughed once. "Let's just keep it civil. Yeah, you say your piece, I say mine, and we all go home in one piece." Barron didn't respond to that, he just looked at Everett for a long second, then said, "I hope you brought better arguments than you had on last week's episode. Otherwise, it's going to be a short conversation." There it was, the flicker in Everett's eyes, brief but there. Everett turned to Gwen, who had entered quietly during their exchange. "We good?" "All set." She replied, "Live in the 12, you'll be seated across from Barron, first segment, campus speech codes, well moved to social media bans in segment 2. Everett nodded. "Keep his mic hot." Gwen gave a tight smile, "All guest mics stay on, Everett." "You know," Everett winked and walked out. Barron turned to Gwen. "Is that normal for him?" he asked, more than ID-like, in the minutes before going live. Barron sat down, went over his notes one last time, and watched the studio countdown begin on the monitor. His heart was steady, not calm exactly, but alert, focused. He glanced at the camera angles being tested, 2-shot, close-up, wide frame, no room for error. He took a sip of water, then looked at Lyle. "Ready?" He received a quick nod. "You've got this." Barron smiled. "He's not as clever as he thinks he is." As the stage lights came on and Everett took his seat across from him, there was one thing no one in that studio expected: how fast the power dynamic was about to shift. The studio lights were harsh, clinical, and hotter than they looked on screen. Barron's chair was angled just slightly away from Everett's, a subtle trick producers use to stage visual tension. He adjusted his blazer, checked his posture, and glanced at the monitor showing the countdown, 5, 4, 0, 3. A red light blinked on the cameras, live microphones were hot. Everett launched right in, "Welcome back to the Everett Lane Show. I'm Everett, and tonight I'm joined by Barron Trump, former White House staffer, commentator, and one of the loudest voices in the so-called free speech movement." Barron smiled but didn't react to the tone. Everett continued, "Let's get right to it. Barron, you've said publicly that college campuses are hostile to independent thought. Are you suggesting that students shouldn't be allowed to protest speakers they disagree with? Barron leaned in slightly. I'm suggesting that shouting someone down isn't protest, it's performance. And when universities allow it, they're not protecting students, they're protecting noise. Everett let out a short laugh, so students don't get to express outrage. Now that's rich, coming from a political side that gets triggered by pronouns. There it was. Barron could feel the energy in the room shift just slightly. He didn't take the bait. Outrage is fine, he said evenly, but silencing is not. There's a difference between protest and preventing speech altogether. If your argument's strong, it should stand on its own, you don't need to block the door. Everett leaned back in his chair, stretching a hand toward the camera as if explaining the basics to a slow class. Let's not pretend this is about protecting speech. You want to center voices you agree with in Christ, censorship when others push back. Barron interrupted, not with volume but with timing, you want to curate debate. You only like freedom of speech when it flattens your worldview. Everett sat forward sharply. I'm not the one passing laws about what teachers can say in classrooms, Barron. Neither am I, Barron shot back, but if we're going to talk policy, let's talk about administrators canceling events because someone's feelings might get hurt. That's not education, that's theater. There was a flicker of discomfort in Everett's expression, more like realization. Barron wasn't playing defense, he was steering. Everett tried again, you've built a career crying victim, oh no, the big, bad university wouldn't let my speaker talk, meanwhile, you push policies that restrict actual academic freedom. Barron's tone remained calm, still pointed. I've spoken at schools where security had to walk students out in tears because their own classmates were threatening them for attending. If that's the freedom you're defending, then maybe check your compass. The studio went quieter. One could hear the shifting of camera operators repositioning and the barely there hum of the air system overhead. Lyle, watching from behind the set wall, didn't blink. Everett smiled tightly and practiced, so it's about feelings now. No, Barron replied evenly, it's about fear, and if you don't see the difference, maybe that's why you're still treating this like a game. The control room voice came in through Everett's earpiece, 2 minutes left in the segment. Everett adjusted his mic, clearly trying to regain control. Barron, I'll ask you plainly, are you saying the left is systematically shutting down free speech? Barron tilted his head slightly. I'm saying it's not a glitch, it's a strategy. Everett opened his mouth, but Barron beat him to it. And the irony is, this isn't new. Every generation has people who pretend they're the resistance while running the institutions, you've just rebranded it for a second. Everett didn't speak, he blinked, gave a forced laugh, then leaned forward as if ready to reset the tone. All right, we've had a lively start after the break. Barron cut in, still steady before Everett could speak, just one question, do you ever let your guests finish a thought before you tell them what they meant? Everett paused. I thought I did, roll the tape back, he said, still smiling. But before the crew could cut to commercial, Everett took one look at the control booth and realized this wasn't going to be just another episode, he could steer back on script. The moment the red light blinked off and the segment went to commercial, the room didn't exhale, no small talk, no sip of water. Everett didn't even look at Barron, he stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, tapping the edge of his note cards against the desk. Gwen's voice came through his earpiece, back live in 90 seconds. Barron sat still. He wasn't smirking, he wasn't angry, he was watching. Finally, Everett turned to him. You done hijacking my show? Barron shrugged lightly. Are you done trying to monologue through a conversation? Everett didn't respond. Gwen's voice again came in, 60 seconds, keep it tight. One of the techs leaned in to adjust Barron's mic, but he didn't move, he could feel something different in the air, now control. Everett wasn't used to being challenged this directly, without shouting or theatrics, and Barron hadn't even raised his voice. 30 seconds later, Everett looked over, trying to resent her look. I'm not the enemy here, you know that, right? He said quietly. Barron's expression didn't change. You say that like it makes you less responsible, he replied. Everett blinked, sat back, and gave a short exhale through his nose. 10 seconds later, Gwen said, live again. Everett's voice shifted slightly, less casual, a little tighter. Welcome back to the Everett Lane Show. I'm here with Barron Trump, who's made it clear he thinks free speech is under attack. So let's push this further. Social media bans. Do you really believe private companies owe you a platform? Barron leaned in, not aggressively, but as someone speaking from experience rather than theory. I believe that when the digital town square controls information that affects national elections and shuts down stories without consequence, we've got a problem. Everett smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You mean, like misinformation? Barron nodded. Exactly, misinformation. Like the time an outlet reported something you said out of context, and you posted 5 videos correcting it. Should you have been suspended for that? Everett paused. That's different, that was my own content, but the platform didn't know that. Then they acted on what they thought, Barron interrupted. That's the point. When a handful of companies become the referees, there are no rules, just reactions. He tried to pivot, but added, but it's their business, it's their call. Barron sat back. And if your bank decided to freeze your account because they didn't like your opinions? Everett laughed, but it sounded nervous. Come on, that's a stretch. No, Barron said quietly and sharply, it's a direction. He let that hang for a second. Everett didn't know where to go. He flipped his card, looked at the camera, then almost reflexively glanced toward the control room. Do we have the clip ready? He asked. Gwen's voice crackled back, you didn't ask for one. Everett blinked, looked back to Barron, okay, so what's the solution? Let everyone say anything, anytime, anywhere. Barron smiled faintly. The solution is accountability, not to corporations, but to each other. If someone lies, call them out, debate them, beat them in the arena of ideas, but don't lock the arena doors. Everett shifted in his chair, his knees started bouncing under the table. Barron continued, now with a slight edge, you talk about protecting democracy, but you're defending systems that punish disagreement. That's not protecting anything, that's controlling outcomes. Everett tried to wave him off. You've made your point. No, Everett, Barron said, voice still calm but now unflinching. I haven't finished. You invited me here to make noise, I showed up to make a point. You don't have to agree, but you could at least let me finish a sentence without slicing it in half. Silence fell again. Everett turned to the camera. Well, that's all the time we have for today. No, Barron interjected again. You still haven't answered my question, the one I asked earlier, do you ever let your guests finish a thought before you tell them what they meant? Everett stared at Barron. He leaned forward, his voice even softer now, because if you don't, then what are you even hosting, an interview or a performance? Everett blinked, but before he could find the words, the control booth's silence set it all in. For the first time in his career, he didn't know how to end his own segment. Everett sat still, no twitch, no blink, just a blank stare at the floor monitor, as if it held the script he'd lost control of. Barron waited, he didn't speak or shift in his chair. He simply looked at Everett, letting the silence expand between them like fog rolling in. The camera crew stayed frozen, no countdown, no cue. Gwen's voice didn't come through the earpieces, even the floor manager hesitated, one hand raised, unsure whether to wave them off or let it ride. Everett cleared his throat and forced a smile, Barron thinks the real threat is too many guardrails. Good to know, Barron replied gently, without sarcasm. No, Everett, I think the real threat is when the people with the microphones pretend they don't have them. That landed. You could hear the creak of Everett's chair as he leaned back, eyebrows drawn, lips pressed into a thin line. He wasn't used to losing grip this early, definitely not on his own turf. He tried to retake the reins. "Well, some of us actually work in media, Barron, we know what's reckless and what's responsible." Barron tilted his head slightly. "Responsible would have been letting your guest answer without interruption. That did it." Everett pushed away from the desk, adjusted his mic pack, and muttered something that the cameras didn't quite catch. Then, abruptly, he stood up. "We're done here." A sound technician flinched. Gwen's voice cut in a half-second later, "Everett, stay seated, we're still live, but..." Everett ignored her. He unclipped his mic, slapped it down on the desk, and turned to leave the set. His earpiece dangled from his collar. Barron didn't move, he simply turned his face toward camera 2, which had instinctively cut to his wide shot. He looked directly into the lens, calm and clear. "If walking off is easier than listening, maybe we're not the fragile ones after all." The silence that followed was electric. Everett had already disappeared behind the curtain, with the crew trailing after him like nervous interns. Lyle, watching from backstage, whispered under his breath, "Holy hell," back in the control booth. Gwen rubbed her temples. "We're not cutting, leave the shot, let him speak." Barron straightened in his chair. "This was never about left or right," he said. "It's about whether people who ask hard questions get treated like enemies, whether we can disagree without someone storming off stage." A few heads in the crew nodded, no one spoke. "You can yell, you can walk out, or you can stay seated and prove your ideas can hold up in daylight. That's what grown-ups do," he continued. At that moment, someone in the control room hit the live feed-to-web switch, and suddenly the studio was streaming directly online, unedited, uncut. Barron glanced once more at the empty chair across from him, still warm. "I came here to have a conversation, not a performance, not a spectacle, just a conversation," he said softly. "We clearly needed more than I thought." Then, almost as if rehearsed, he stood up, unhooked his mic, and handed it to a technician as he walked off the set. No one called him back, no one needed to, because the cameras had captured what words couldn't fix, a moment when everything shifted. It wasn't until he stepped into the hallway and saw the notifications pouring onto his phone that he realized just how far this moment would travel. For the first few minutes after stepping off the set, his phone buzzed in his hand, non-stop messages, missed calls, emails stacking on top of each other. His lock screen was a blur of names. Lyle caught up to him by the service elevator. "You okay?" he asked. Barron nodded, still scrolling. "What's it look like out there?" Lyle leaned in slightly. "You're everywhere, trending on X, Instagram clips already circulating. Somebody screen recorded the walk-off and added subtitles." Barron blinked rapidly. Moments later, a producer from another show crossed the hallway behind them and gave Barron a sharp glance, half curious, half concerned. No words, just a look. They rode the elevator down in silence, somewhere between floors 6 and 4. Barron's phone buzzed again, this time a call from a number he didn't recognize. He declined it. "Any word from Everett?" he asked Lyle. Lyle shook his head. "Gwen's doing damage control, they might cut the show short tonight, re-air a panel." As they stepped out into the parking garage, the chill of the early evening wrapped around them. Barron finally took a deep breath. "I wasn't trying to humiliate him," he said quietly. Lyle replied, "You were just honest." "That's what rattled him," Barron said, sitting in the back of the car, phone still in hand, as notifications kept rolling in. Barron Trump stands his ground, Everett Lane gets schooled on live TV. The moment everything shifted, some were cheering, others furious, a few called it a publicity stunt, but most just kept rewatching the clip, sharing it, arguing over it, quoting it. By the time they reached the hotel, Gwen had texted Lyle, "Everett is not speaking to press. Please don't gloat." Barron laughed softly upon reading it. "I wasn't planning to," he thought. Later that night, alone at his desk in his room, Barron replayed the moment, not the part where Everett walked off, but the seconds before the silence, the decision not to yell, not to match volume with volume. It would have been easy to get emotional, easy to snap back, but he didn't, and that made all the difference. A text came through from his brother in Austin, "You stayed seated, that's the whole win." Barron replied, "Thanks." It didn't feel like a win, his brother answered, "It did, to a lot of people." Barron looked out the window at the city below. The streets were still alive, people going about their lives, not thinking about cable TV feuds. And yet, in some corner of the internet, a conversation had started, not just about left and right, but about tone, about control, about who gets to speak and who decides when the conversation ends. He thought about what Everett had said earlier, some of us actually work in media. But maybe that was the problem, too many shows, not enough listening, too many people rehearsing lines instead of facing hard questions. Barron didn't have all the answers, he didn't think he wanted anything more. But he knew one thing for sure, next time someone tries to shout him down, they'll remember this night, because he didn't flinch, he didn't raise his voice, and he didn't leave the room. He made them do it, and in the end, sometimes the quietest stance leaves the loudest echo. The moral: don't mistake control for courage. The strongest voice isn't always the loudest, it's the one that stays calm when everything else gets noisy. If you found value in this story, or if it reminded you of how powerful restraint and clarity can be, subscribe, there's more where that came from.